Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going back to ancient Greece to meet a philosopher who you might not know by name, but his ideas are all around us.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm talking about Chrysippus, the powerhouse of Stoicism.
Okay.
Think of it this way. If Stoicism were a band,
Okay.
Zeno might have been the founder, but Chrysippus, he wrote all the hit songs.
That's a great analogy. And it's so true. Chrysippus doesn't get the same spotlight as some other Stoics, like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. But his contributions were huge. He's often called the second founder of Stoicism, and for good reason.
Second founder. That's a pretty big title. What earned him that kind of recognition?
Well, he didn't just follow Zeno's lead. He took those core Stoic ideas and really fleshed them out. He built a whole system diving deep into logic, ethics, and even physics, all through the lens of Stoicism. Some scholars even argue that Stoicism as we know it wouldn't exist without him.
Wow, I had no idea. So we've got this somewhat hidden figure shaping one of the most enduring philosophies in history. Before we dive into his ideas, I have to ask you about this story I came across. Apparently, Chrysippus died laughing at a donkey eating figs.
Really?
Yeah. He even joked that the donkey should have some wine to wash them down, and then, boom! Okay, it's probably a tall tale, but it paints a pretty interesting picture of the guy, right?
It does. It's a good reminder that even brilliant philosophers were human. They had a sense of humor. They found joy in the everyday. And they weren't just these stuffy figures lecturing from a podium.
Okay, so we have this brilliant and possibly hilarious philosopher who reshaped Stoicism. What were some of the big ideas that made him so important?
Well, let's start with his work on logic. This is where Chrysippus really blew my mind. He was way ahead of his time in developing propositional logic, which is essentially how we figure out cause and effect. It's like he laid out the blueprints for how computers think.
Hold on. Are you telling me that this ancient Greek philosopher is somehow connected to the technology we use today?
Absolutely. His work on propositional logic forms the basis for algorithms. The things that power everything from Google searches to self-driving cars. It's mind-blowing to think that those ideas can be traced back to Chrysippus. But beyond the technical stuff, he was also a huge advocate for using reason to find truth. In a world flooded with information and opinions, that idea feels more relevant than ever.
It's like he's giving us a tool to cut through all the noise and make sense of things. That's a skill I think we could all use a little more of these days.
Right, and it's not just about logic. Chrysippus, like other Stoics, also believed in living in harmony with nature. Now, that might sound a little vague, but has some really interesting implications for how we live our lives.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does living in harmony with nature actually look like?
For Chrysippus, it starts with understanding the natural order of things and accepting what we can't control. Think about it like this. As humans, we're part of this grand universe, and there are forces at play that are bigger than us. We can't control the weather. We can't control other people's actions. And we certainly can't control the fact that a donkey might decide to eat figs and then,
Okay, I see what you did there, bringing it back to the donkey.
had to. But seriously, accepting what we can't control doesn't mean being passive. It's about focusing our energy on what we can control, our own thoughts, actions, and reactions. Chrysippus believed this acceptance is key to finding peace and happiness.
So it's like that serenity prayer, right? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
Exactly. It's a concept that resonates across cultures and philosophies. And for Chrysippus, it wasn't just about serenity, it was also connected to living a virtuous life.
All right, so what did Chrysippus consider virtuous? Was it all togas and sandals and reciting poetry in ancient Greek?
Not quite. For Chrysippus and Stoics in general, virtue was the highest good, the path to true happiness. And they're talking about qualities like wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control qualities that honestly are still incredibly relevant today. Think about the kind of leaders we admire, or even the kind of person you want to be. Don't those virtues come to mind?
Yeah, actually they do. But how do we take these ancient ideas about virtue and apply them to our modern world? Things have changed a bit since ancient Greece, haven't they?
They have, and that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because Chrysippus's ideas, even though they're thousands of years old, have a surprising amount of wisdom for navigating the challenges we face today.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. I'm ready to hear how this ancient philosophy can help us handle 21st century problems. Let's dive in.
Let's start with something we can all relate to, stress.
Okay.
Chrysippus had this idea that negative emotions, like fear and anger, don't just happen to us. They actually stem from our judgments about events, not the events themselves.
So it's not the traffic jam that's stressing us out, it's
Right.
my reaction to it. I can see that. But how does that help us actually deal with stress?
Well, what's fascinating is that this idea, centuries later, became the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy,
Oh, wow.
or CBT.
Yeah.
It's a really popular type of therapy. And it all goes back to Chrysippus' insight that we have more control over our emotions than we think. We might not be able to control the traffic, but we
Hmm.
can control how we respond to it.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So ancient philosophy is now a modern therapy technique.
Is
But how do we actually do that? How do we change our reactions?
Chrysippus would say, use your logic. Instead of getting caught up in the emotion, take a step back and examine your thoughts.
Yeah.
Are they rational? Are they helpful? Maybe that traffic jam gives you a chance to practice patience. Or listen to that podcast you've been meaning to catch up on. It's about shifting your perspective.
Okay, I can see how that could be helpful for everyday annoyances.
Right.
But what about the really big challenges, like losing your job or dealing with a global pandemic?
Yeah.
Those feel a bit bigger than a traffic jam.
You're right. Those are major life challenges. And this is where Chrysippus' view on determinism comes in.
Okay.
He believed that the universe operates according to a natural order. Think of it like a giant tapestry. There's a pattern to it, even if we can't always see the whole picture.
So kind of like fate, is he saying everything is predetermined?
Not exactly. Chrysippus believed we still have a choice in how we respond to events, even those that seem beyond our control. Think about it like being a runner in a race.
Okay.
You can't control the weather, the terrain, or how fast your competitors are. But you can control your effort, your strategy, your mindset.
So instead of getting frustrated that it's raining during the race, focus on running the best race I can given the circumstances.
Exactly. It's not about being passive, but about recognizing that fighting against the inevitable only creates more suffering. We can choose to rail against the universe, or we can choose to accept what is and focus on moving forward. It's that inner strength, that resilience that Chrysippus believed was essential for navigating life's ups and downs.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about logic and living in harmony with nature and this Stoic approach to handling uncertainty. What about ethics? Where does that fit into Chrysippus's philosophy?
Well, remember how we talked about virtue being the highest good for Chrysippus? That's where ethics comes in.
Okay.
He believed that living virtuously was essential not only for personal happiness, but also for creating a just and harmonious society.
Okay.
And those virtues he talked about, wisdom, courage, justice, self-control, those are timeless principles that can guide our ethical decision-making even today.
It's amazing how these ideas from ancient Greece can still be relevant to our lives today.
Right. It's like they tapped into something fundamental about human nature.
Mm.
Think about all the ethical dilemmas we still grapple with in our personal lives, in business and politics. Chrysippus' emphasis on virtue gives us a framework for navigating those complexities. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it might cost us something.
So it's not just about feeling good, but about being good, making ethical choices. I like that. It's a good reminder that ethics aren't just some abstract concept.
Yeah.
They're about how we live our lives day in and day out.
Exactly. And for Chrysippus, that was the whole point. Philosophy wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was about living a better life. And I think that's a message that still resonates today.
Okay, so we've talked about how Chrysippus's ideas can help us with things like stress, ethical dilemmas, and handling life's curveballs. But I think what our listeners really want to know is, how do we actually put this into practice?
Yeah.
How do we take this ancient wisdom and make it work for us, in our daily lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the key here is to remember that Chrysippus wasn't just a philosopher in an ivory tower.
Right.
He was engaged with the world, and he intended for these ideas to be applied to everyday life. So think about the specific challenges you're facing. Maybe you're dealing with a difficult coworker, or feeling overwhelmed by the news, or struggling with a tough decision.
I think we've all been there.
Right. So let's take that difficult coworker example. How might Chrysippus approach that? Well, he might remind us to separate our emotions from the situation. Instead of getting caught up in anger or frustration, could you try to understand their perspective? Could you approach the situation with reason and empathy?
And what about feeling overwhelmed by the news? It feels like there's a constant stream of information coming at us from all directions.
That's where Chrysippus' emphasis on logic and reason can be really helpful. Instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media or getting sucked into the negativity of the news, be intentional about the information you consume. Choose sources that are reliable and informative, and limit your exposure to things that drain your energy. Remember, you have control over what you let into your mind.
So it's about filtering the noise, focusing on what's important. It's like a mental detox.
Exactly. And that can be really powerful self-care. And as for those tough decisions, well, Chrysippus might encourage us to think about our values. What principles are guiding our choices? Are we acting in alignment with our virtues? Sometimes making the right decision isn't easy, but it's always worth it.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about Chrysippus and Stoicism, and I'm actually excited to try incorporating some of these ideas into my own life.
Me too. It's a reminder that wisdom is timeless. Chrysippus may have lived over 2,000 years ago, but his
Wow.
insights into human nature logic and living a good life are still relevant today.
So it's not just about studying ancient philosophy, but about finding those nuggets of wisdom that we can apply to our own lives, our own challenges.
Exactly. And that, I think, is the true gift of exploring these ideas. It helps us to live more thoughtfully, more intentionally, and ultimately more fulfilling lives.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the wisdom of Chrysippus. We encourage you to explore some of the ideas we've discussed today and see how they might resonate with you. You might just be surprised at how much an ancient philosopher can teach you about living a good life in the modern world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.